did not develop with a specific box of objectives, but instead developed over time, warranting evaluation to continue with a choice there by program leaders and the evaluator, right, to truly involve participatory approaches in not only the evaluation itself, but in continued program development and implementation. Community-driven initiatives evolve. They evolve over time, whether quickly or slowly, and goals and objectives shift with community-driven initiatives as stakeholders engage. And also as maybe if the evaluant provides, for example, services on current issues, as those issues change, so too do our goals. Traditional evaluation models usually assume predefined outcomes, stable structures. I'm thinking logic model, and trying to really stick to a predetermined plan, using the word positivist and post-positivist structures with very clear metrics of success. And those are great models to use for more linear projects. So, for example, I use traditional evaluation models within NSF funded evaluations. But community-driven initiatives usually involve goals that were not there at the beginning. They're emerging. One of the things you'll hear me say quite a bit that has to do not only with the evaluation principles I'm discussing, but specifically regarding MAD topics, is that lived experience equals expertise. And so while we have our traditional expertise in the sense of our professionals in the sphere, for example, in mental health initiatives, that might be our clinical perspectives, our stakeholders also provide expertise as far as their experience. So their experience is their expertise. We also, in evaluation of community-driven initiatives, really need to think about relational impact. And relational impact can look different in different contexts and spheres. And sometimes it takes unique approaches to figure out how to measure that relational impact. And then, of course, our community priorities evolve. And so a question I pose to you to think about throughout this presentation, and I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end, is how can we evaluate innovation without constraining it? And before we move forward, I also just want to put this thought out there. Many times in community-driven initiatives, the evaluator themselves becomes a stakeholder. Whether that was the intention or not, many times these community-driven initiatives have outcomes that impact all, including us as the evaluator. And so reflexivity becomes so important within the evaluation of these types of evaluants or models. And so to introduce the case for community-driven innovation, MAD topics. So I have obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and when I got my PhD in 2023, I really wanted to research OCD. I was like, there's a problem, people don't understand it. And fast forward, I found that, wow, there was a problem. 86% of our pre-service teachers didn't even believe it was real, despite the fact that 2/3 of people with OCD will consider attempting suicide. And so that's a pretty heavy statement there. But that led to the development of MAD topics, which I created as an innovative interdisciplinary framework of praxis, research, and scholarship that puts lived experience as expertise first, because many of the clinical classifications of OCD also didn't align with the OCD lived experience because it's not based on that, but it supplements that with clinical perspectives. It's based off of MAD studies, which is a theoretical field that emphasizes and centers lived experiences and challenges oppression. But what makes it different from MAD studies is that it also includes that clinical perspective. And so it started out in 2024 with a panel symposium on OCD and ADHD and education, the two MAD topics of interest. MAD being a term, think of Alice Carroll, Lewis Carroll, we're all a little mad here, and similar to queer studies, which reclaims the word queer, MAD studies reclaims the word mad And so MAD topics is a general term to represent mental health disabilities that are invisible and usually make people uncomfortable to talk about. So MAD topics itself centers lived experience as expertise, emphasizes interdisciplinary collaborations between academia, clinicians, and the community. And one of the major deliverables of MAD topics, which is the case that we will be talking about, is an annual symposium that provides about 4 to 5 panelists, half of whom have lived experience and speak on that, which is a very brave thing to do with a certain MAD topic. And then half are clinical perspectives. And this is open to all of the community and basically encourages speaking about things that are uncomfortable and that we usually societally try to shy away from. The challenge I ran into with this once it got started, and 2024 was a huge success, and then 2025, the participants, the attendees, the stakeholders said they wanted to hear about anxiety and depression. And so that was 2025. And then this 2026 one that's upcoming this Saturday is on autism spectrum disorder, also stakeholder driven. The challenge became, okay, my traditional post-survey, retrospective post-survey is not, there's so much more here that's coming out in conversations after the panel and in the structural changes that I'm seeing, that these traditional evaluation metrics and even the logic model that was created beforehand, they're not capturing. And so the question became, how can I evaluate MAD topics in a way without constraining it, but also in a way that provides opportunity to hear the lived experience of stakeholders for this event? And so this is an example of a community-driven event because all MAD topic symposium are designed based off interest and inclination from participants of the previous year. And stakeholder feedback is encouraged throughout the year. So far, MAD Topics has, as an evaluand, has reached over 1,000 participants and has gained international interest. It's been adopted as, for example, a curriculum for teachers in China to be able to better relate to their students who may struggle with OCD or ADHD, with the idea that with each MAD topic discussed, it could be adopted as in different replicative ways. We now also have a MAD topics board because I realized that it was growing way beyond what I was capable of. So I'm the founder and director of MAD topics, and I really wanted all of the decisions to be created by the stakeholders that it is directly impacting. So that's first responders, educators, students, family members, people with lived experience, and community members. And the success indicators, thinking in a traditional evaluation sense, include engagement across all diverse populational spheres, increases in empathy and understanding, whether for self or for others, as well as knowledge not only about the clinical classification, but also the lived experience of others, and then decreases in stigma. And those were the original success indicators that we needed to expand from. This is just a quick overview of the participant distributions by year. Usually we have about 100 persons in person at the symposia, and then it's streamed on YouTube. And so I think the first ever 2024 has over 700 views now, and then 2025 is getting close up to that. And so we have quite a few people join the live stream as well. But you can tell that there's quite a distribution here. While we have majority students each year due to, I'm assuming due to the location, it being hosted at a university, we also have quite a few faculty, staff, very few mental health professionals, which is an interesting topic that so far evaluation, we're still working on ways to understand the potential hesitation of mental health professionals to attend the event. And part of that might also be because of the grounding in MAD studies, which challenges psychiatric oppression. So you can tell there's a lot of heavy interweaving parts with this. But each year we also have good representation from those who have lived experience with these mental health disabilities. which is a beautiful thing because, as someone with OCD, it can be scary to intentionally enter a space that's going to talk about something that you deal with, not only because it could be emotionally heavy for those stakeholders, but also it's bringing a little bit of vulnerability to the light. And so you can tell there's a lot of stuff going on, not only with the evaluand, but also with the diverse stakeholders that we are reaching. And also, I think that this distribution represents why a purely top-down evaluation approach would miss key impacts. It sets up a need for curiosity-centered evaluation. And so one of the things that I encourage you to think about is, if we're thinking about top-down evaluation approaches and those aren't exactly working to capture what we need, maybe we could ask what questions matter most to the community and even start from scratch there. And I say that because, yes, the program did meet predefined benchmarks. There was one publication that my team did where we found that, for example, it was significantly effective in increasing empathy and decreasing stigma, and that effectiveness varied for family members of those with OCD versus ADHD. But that didn't really tell us much else. And so last year, we kind of transitioned to start asking what questions matter most to the community, and the community being not only the attendees of past symposia, but the attendees that we haven't reached yet. For example, we have not reached the veteran population, and we have not reached, for example, the elderly population. And there's a question there as to why is this potentially not reaching all populations, which of course makes it a community-driven evaluation. Basically, curiosity-centered evaluation, what we're talking about today, prioritizes listening and basically request for practical strategies versus emotional outcomes and self-acceptance. And so we adapt questions over time to represent what matters most to the community after asking the community what matters most to them. We capture emergent outcomes as they come, not just snapshots. Evaluation becomes a method of inquiry and not just measurement. And so I'm using terms here that are also used in research a lot. And that also begs the question, can evaluation continuously inform research if we act as researchers of this evaluand at the same time as we're acting as evaluators? So we're not only evaluating predetermined metrics, but we are inquiring about what we are missing. And the reason this the catalyst for this was year one produced outcomes that were not expected at all. One of those was self-love and care. Quite a few participants came up to me afterwards, attendees, and said, Dr. Simone, I realized after this that I've been told I had ADHD all my life and I really had OCD, and I went and I got help and I'm doing a lot better. Or, I was always so ashamed of myself and I am practicing self-love and I'm so much better. And that was way beyond anything that we originally planned for Mad Topics to yield. And so it begged the question, okay, how can we measure what we do not know through using curiosity-centered approaches to evaluation? So what are curiosity-centered evaluation methods? Mixed methods are using mixed methods versus just primarily quantitative or qualitative methods is a beautiful way to gather not only the statistical numerical data, which we can use as evidence of effectiveness, but also to gather the story behind those data. So what people are saying about those data. Mixed methods participatory approaches that we've used in Mad Topics so far have included observations, our retrospective post surveys, and those observations occurred during the panel symposium and after. Individual interviews with attendees, focus group interviews with attendees, and then stakeholder dialogue. So the conversations that we're hearing before the event, after the event, during the event. Evaluation questions we're no longer stagnant, but are still evolving and evolved after each symposium so far. And because of that, emergent outcomes started surfacing, including belonging, collective meaning making, and community ownership. These methods further allow for understanding what participants identify as meaningful, not just what program leaders and the evaluator deem as meaningful. And many times, what participants deem as meaningful for community-driven, innovative evaluants, we might not have even thought of as the evaluator. And that is what I have found over the past 3 years with this, is that many times too, the questions that are posed or what is meaningful to stakeholders is so much deeper and impactful than the metrics that I had designed for year one. It's beautiful in a way, and it definitely adds depth to the evaluation. And what do I mean by these participatory evaluation strategies? How do we understand what our stakeholders deem as meaningful? So far, and I think that as evaluators, we are continuously also evaluating ourselves and learning the best approaches to the evaluant. So I could see these expanding considerably. But so far, what we have found works well in approaching evaluation through a curiosity-centered lens. First of all, involves participatory evaluative strategies with a researcher mindset. And so I understand that there are definitely arguments as to, is evaluation research, is research evaluation? And I am sharing that I believe we can evaluate using curiosity-centered approaches with the researcher mindset. And by a researcher mindset, I mean a mindset that is continuously participating in critical inquiry and seeing what we're missing and what's been well and maybe what is not working in our evaluation strategies themselves. One way to involve stakeholders is community sense-making circles. This could be, for example, in a focus group setting, or it could be, after the Mad Topics Symposia, we have time for community Q&A and a meet and greet. And I invite you to picture after the symposium, both in 2024 and 2025, all of the attendees, I'd say out of the 100 in-person attendees, probably 80 stayed because they just wanted to speak with other attendees and the panelists. There were tears, there were shared lived experiences, and it was probably one of the most beautiful things that I have seen. And the statement that I just said reflects me as a stakeholder and not just an evaluator. I feel like it's very easy in sensitive, community-driven evaluants to start developing a personal connection to the evaluant itself, especially if that evaluant is over time. And instead of saying, oh, I can't do that, objectivity, positivism, I believe that we can use it as a strength in our evaluation as long as we remain clear and reflective continuously. And so using those sense-making circles, whatever that looks like, whether it's post-event observations or focus groups, to interpret the findings of the evaluant together. Shared governance structures are also another way to approach participatory evaluation. And so actually through realizing that there was so much we did not know, and we did not know what we did not know about the impacts of the evaluant, we developed the Mad Topics Board, which has representation from all types of stakeholders to make decisions about the evaluant itself. And then adaptive evaluation logs, these kind of reflect research journals where program leaders and evaluators can reflect, whether that's on things that they have done to improve the evaluant or to assess it, or whether it's on simply thought processes and reflections of the evaluant itself. Evaluation methods should ultimately follow community outcomes and therefore become iterative and collaborative. In this way, evaluation and research roles usually overlap in community initiatives, whether we're aware of it or not. And so lastly, I'd like to talk about some lessons learned through using curiosity-centered evaluation approaches. Um, One of the things that we learned, and again, if you remember the three outcomes that we were going to look at, increased empathy and understanding, decreased stigma. This is so much more than that. Through using these participatory approaches, um, we found that Mad Topics is not a static program. Evaluation is not a final step. Instead, we use community experience first as a catalyst, including the observations, the dialogue we overhear. That informs how we evaluate the program and the questions we ask, our analysis and our interpretation of the program. This then informs research insights, whether we're interested in publishing research on the evaluand or not. Um, it does provide research insights because we are being critical inquirers of the evaluand itself. Those directly impact program design, so formative evaluation and assessment and changes. And eventually that leads to new community questions. Through involving stakeholders, we also involve the emerging ideas. Uh, Evaluation functions as part of a continuous learning process rather than being the end goal. So community dialogue generates questions, evaluation captures insights, research translates those insights or a researcher mindset, and then the next symposium evolves, the next evaluand evolves. Some examples of this just from this case, Mad Topics. For example, with lived experience, one participant said, "This session named things I have felt but didn't have language for," which points to more societal, larger issues as far as how we provide education on mental health. Family members or caretakers, this was a population that we had not, or I had not exactly pictured as the symposium being for, and they are one of the main stakeholders now. One noted, "I'm not the one who's been through it, but I see how systems harm people. This panel helped me name that." And so that's also pointing to structural challenges that we had not even really thought about at the beginning. From new participants that were just interested, the panelists were incredibly thoughtful. I felt like I was invited into a conversation, not just watching one. And that points to what mattered to the participants, not the panel itself, but having a seat at the table and being able to engage with the actual evaluand. One thing I wanted to point out too, I never thought about this. The first year it was in a kind of auditorium setting. There were no windows. Last year it was in basically a lecture hall with more videos. There were multiple participants who noted they loved the sunlight, that they needed the sunshine, and it made them feel more comfortable. They also talked about integrating art, poetry, multimedia, things that we never would have thought of. And one other thing that I'd like to note is that these hidden impacts represent the lived impact of dialogue spaces, um, and also how different stakeholders interpret the evaluand differently, and trying to understand curiosity, using curiosity-centered approaches, how we can reach different stakeholders if they are all getting something different from the evaluand, or they're all seeking something different. And again, providing that observational and qualitative insights lets us know things such as how the environment matters when the environment was never of question in the first place. It really shows how our participants can shape our evaluation, even if we ourselves might be a stakeholder within the evaluation. And so I know we have about 15 minutes left, and so I wanted to open up for questions and answers. Before I do that, just a couple of discussion questions, also just to even think about as evaluators, and just in reflection. And these are, how can we as evaluators balance rigor with flexibility, still have reliable and valid results? So the numbers, the data, the measures, but with flexibility. What outcomes do our traditional metrics overlook? Think sunlight. And then also, where might curiosity-centered evaluation apply in your work? And so I invite you to reflect on those questions before I stop sharing the screen. The PowerPoint, which I believe is in the space. These are some more information on Mad Topics, some of the publications we've done, and also recordings to past panels. Some rad resources for evaluation. This is also on AEA 365. And can provide some more linear processes of getting started with curiosity-centered evaluation. And then, of course, feel free to contact me if you have any questions or you want to collaborate. I'm always interested in new making new professional relationships. And thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to present on curiosity-centered evaluation. I'm going to stop sharing now. Let's see. Righty. Does anyone have any questions? Or any thoughts on the discussion statements? Oh, can you talk a little more about how evaluators become stakeholders? Yes, I love this question. I don't think it's a choice as much as something that kind of happens in the background without even realizing it. And so for me, that looked like the evaluand. And of course, my situation is a little unique in that uh, I guess I from the beginning had personal interest in Mad Topics and that I created it. But as when I stepped back and from the decisions to take more of an evaluator role in it, I realized that because I was personally motivated and interested in seeing it going well, and I also benefited from the outputs that it gave, that I had in myself become a stakeholder. I had become someone who benefited from the outcomes of this evaluation. And that might not be something that would be common for example, educational initiatives where the stakeholders are specifically this group of students or this group of faculty or these stakeholders. But it could be more common in community evaluands that offer some kind of information on a sensitive topic. And so I think it's very easy, even if we have an objective evaluator mindset going in, and even for those of us who see ourselves as positivists, I think it's easier than we think it is if we are dealing with evaluation that does provide some kind of community deliverable to then find ourselves also benefiting from that deliverable and becoming a stakeholder. And I would say instead of really trying to push those connections to the side, putting on the researcher mindset and saying, okay, yes, I do have a subjectivity here or positionality. My positionality makes me potentially have some biases with this evaluation. But at the same time, while I need to acknowledge those and those present a limitation potentially to the level of reliability of the report of the outcomes, it could be a strength because that allows, as a stakeholder, we can further connect with other stakeholders. And then our lived experience as both the evaluator and the stakeholder aligned with the lived experience or the expertise of our stakeholders themselves, I believe can improve really the depth of the evaluation that we are presenting. I don't know if that answered your question, and thank you for asking. Another question, is your advisory board something that's an ongoing structure or different every year? A great question. So it actually only began last fall, and right now it is already becoming different, it seems, quarterly. And I think the reason for that is one thing that was very important to me was that in handing off, decisions, I wanted to make sure that every type of voice was represented. So that being people with lived experience, community members, first responders, teachers. And what I've noticed is that, of course, we all have only 24 hours in a day, but certain stakeholders may not be able to devote time to a board. For example, first responders. I've noticed we've been kind of going through different sets of first responders. And also, I've noticed with the sensitive nature, people with lived experience may stop feeling comfortable speaking about their lived experience, or alternatively, other stakeholders want to be more involved and ask to join the board. And so my goal is to not keep it a stagnant structure, but to allow it to be flexible to the needs of the community itself. And so in that way, I would say the board could even be evaluated in its own evaluand. But it definitely, that changing structure and allowing for that flexibility aligns with the new outcomes that we're finding every year with MAD topics. And so that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Um, I'd love to hear more about your sense making circles. What are some techniques you like to use to help people engage with findings and maybe voluminous qualitative data for interpretation? Thank you for asking that. Yes, I think I'm pretty sure the only two attendees who were PhD students and very interested in qualitative analysis read the qualitative findings, even though we provided those for member checks to everyone who participated in focus groups. For us, sense-making circles have looked like two very distinct things. And so one of those are planned focus groups that happen after the event with semi-structured questions and room for flexibility depending on responses and questions. And those have been insightful, I'd say more so for research than for evaluation, because also as you all know, if you're in a focus group, there is some level of, yes, I'm comfortable to speak about what I'm feeling, but I also know this is being recorded and it will be transcribed, and maybe I'm not presenting exactly what I would say if I felt like I was in a more comfortable situation. And so on the flip side of that, usually after every symposium, we allow time for, whether that's in meet and greet rooms or whether that is in just an atrium with sunlight, the sense making circles, observing how participants themselves, stakeholders themselves, create their own sense-making circles. And I think this is something that would be common across community initiatives, is that require a level of connection with the lived experience of in this case, the person speaking on their lived experience. As evaluators, as the evaluator in my research team, we will observe the sense-making circles that the stakeholders themselves create after the event. And what that usually looks like is literal circles of people that don't know each other, that are talking about what their experiences were, hugging each other, talking about what they wish had been talked about, discussing what they're taking home to their partners or their children, sharing tears, sharing food, the community itself, providing a sense of community together. That in itself produces such valuable data because it's natural observation. And while it might not be good for research unless specifically approved by an IRB, for example, those are the things, those are the treasures that can truly inform the evaluation and inform, okay, how did they experience this event? Seeing them naturally speak about it on their own terms and form those connections about things that usually never would have been talked about. And so I feel like those are, and of course, I am very interested in other forms of sense-making circles as well. Let's see. Have you ever used online platforms like Reddit for focus groups to engage people with lived experience in mental health? Just curious about how you have been connecting with people with lived experience. Great question. Actually, no, but that is like an amazing, recommendation, and I think I want to try that. So what has been interesting was the first year, I shared on my lived experience and reached out to an author on their lived experience and kind of just directly asked people immediately after. Stakeholders themselves started offering snapshots of their lived experience and either offering wanting to speak on their lived experience or sharing and joining the pool of potential stakeholders who would speak on their lived experience. And so we've been identifying those with lived experience basically based off of the stakeholder responses and stakeholder engagement after the fact. And that was one of the outcomes that we never thought we would that was going to be measured was the what used to be silent or silenced maybe a discussion of personal experience with mental health has become louder. And so, but that being said, I love the idea of using a platform like Reddit, and I think that I'm going to look into that further. So thank you, because there is always the fear of, what if this year no one really wants to speak on their lived experience. So thank you for that. Let's see. What has been your experience with funders in the space of community-driven evaluation versus more traditional evaluation? Yes. So we are still in seeking phases, I would say. While we have been able to be supported by internal grants, what's interesting is that we still emphasize the numbers. We still emphasize the numbers when seeking funding because the outcomes associated with the curiosity-centered approaches, so the more emotional outcomes, those do not reflect still, societally at least, especially by funding agencies, as importantly as the data. And that is one thing that I am hoping to argue as far as policy goes, the true how lived experience itself is data. That's definitely a whole other conversation, but we are seeking private sponsorship. So one thing we noticed is this type of evaluand sits very deeply with some people and might be kind of pushed back by others because it is so unique and because it is based off of forever changing community needs. And so I'm hoping to have further insights on how using insights from curiosity-centered evaluation, those emotional inputs, might be better correlated with securing funding from private donors. But we are hoping to become a nonprofit soon at some point to be able to also secure more funding. So that's a great question. An unfortunate answer to that, but that's something I'm definitely trying to argue further. I know there's only 2 minutes left, so I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for the engaging questions and for spending this time with me. This is definitely a project that has helped me to grow as an evaluator and a researcher, and I would love to collaborate in the future. So my email is ksimone@tntech.edu, and I'm putting that in the chat. And then you can also find Mad Topics. I'm going to put that in the chat. If you want to learn more, if you want to look at any of our resources, we provide resources on various Mad Topics. And so I hope to engage with you in the future, and feel free to email me any post questions as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Simone, and thank you everybody for joining with us. I hope you all will enjoy our rest of our session. Bye.
Thank you.